Hi, everybody. So, welcome on the show. And today I got Isaac, who's got the blog Energy Bad Boys, which is worded very, very well. So, welcome aboard.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. So, let me hit you with the first question is, can America have both a really good electrical grid along with all these wind and solar systems that are heavily subsidized by the federal government?
I think we're seeing that experiment play out in real time, David, and I don't think it's working out for us. The real problem is, well, there's a bunch of different problems with the subsidies that are paid to the wind and solar developers. But what's happening is instead of having enough reliable power plants on the system, coal, natural gas, nuclear, whatever you want to use, to meet our peak demand, the policies that are being introduced, whether that be federal regulations or state mandates for wind, solar, or net zero, are reducing the amount of dispatchable capacity we have to the extent that we don't have enough to meet our peak demand. So therefore, we are becoming reliant on wind and solar or batteries to make sure that the lights stay on. And one of the things Mitch Rolling and I have done a lot in our work, we started our own company called Always On Energy Research, and Energy Bad Boys is our substack that we write in our free time. What we do for fun is more work. That's just kind of the people that we are. But um, ultimately, this idea that we're going to be able to power a 21st century economy with wind, solar, and battery storage isn't going to work. So really, the devil is in the details in terms of at what point do you start to introduce too much complication into your energy system, and then that starts to degrade your coal plants faster. Maybe they have to cycle more frequently, and therefore there's more wear and tear on them. That's the same with a nuclear plant too. It doesn't have to be a coal plant. It's just we are. I think John Constable, I forget which organization he's with. I think the name has changed a few times, but he said if you're going to be injecting chaotic energy sources into a grid that requires stable, predictable energy sources, you're going to have negative consequences, and we're finally meeting those negative consequences.
All right, so follow-on question for you on that. For regions of the country where peak usage in summer is higher than peak usage in winter, Colorado, surprisingly, summer is our highest peaks. Is solar plus batteries, which gets you the duck curve, are those still a reasonable solution for at least some of the peak energy?
Maybe I mean, it's better than if you're a winter peaking system, but I still don't think that the battery storage has come down enough in cost, especially if you're talking about, long duration energy storage. There's trade-offs with that. These iron air batteries that people are talking about have really long duration, but they have a lot of loss. I think it's something like over 50% of the energy that you put into them is lost during the oxidation and unoxidation of the batteries. I don't think that the battery storage technology is there, and especially not in a way that's cost competitive with natural gas. Like, could you do it potentially? Sure, California's trying, but what are you giving up? What kind of opportunity cost are you incurring when you try to do that instead of using, substitutes that are readily available, whether that's wind or sorry, coal, natural gas, nuclear power, something dispatchable, or even geothermal. There's a lot of cool developments in advanced geothermal. I think it's also interesting you mentioned Colorado. The policies enacted in Colorado are going to make it a winter peaking system as well. So if you're going to try and electrify home heating and transportation,
Oh,
you're going to be really increasing your demand for power in the wintertime, and especially at night when the sun is down. Even areas where it seems like it might make sense at present, you don't know what those like changes in load pattern moving forward are going to be. I'd stick to something dispatchable, but that's just me. I'm risk averse.
yeah. And for what it's worth, I actually did get solar put in our house recently, plus a battery to cover power outages primarily. And we had a snowstorm yesterday. It was only 3 or 4 inches. Beautiful day today, not that warm. And the solar cells are totally blocked by the snow, and I'm not getting up on the roof to clear them off.
Yeah, a little too old for that.
way too old. And then the other thing I want to put out, and you and I have talked about this offline. I'm not asking you to back up my numbers. I'm the one that did it, but I have a blog post up about because of the backup gas generators used for wind, it actually turns out wind, in my opinion, on my calculations, emits more CO2 in total from their backup generators than if you just had a combined cycle gas turbine. So let me take you on to the next question then. Do you see any power sources that should be getting incentives and subsidies right now because they're in their infancy and need help?
Yeah, I don't like the idea of subsidizing any form of energy. I'm one of those curmudgeon-y people that just thinks you
Mhm.
should let the markets figure this stuff out. But when it comes to electricity, we don't have a free market. We have either government-approved monopoly utilities in fully integrated states, or you have a heavy hand from the federal government, whether that's the production tax credit, investment tax credit, or the EPA saying that um, certain types of power plants just can't exist. Like it's really difficult to build a new coal plant unless you're using carbon capture and sequestration technology that really hasn't been proved out, in my opinion. So um, I think that subsidizing wind and solar is a bad idea. I think if you're going to subsidize something that makes power first and is carbon free second. So, what I mean by that is, nuclear power. Okay, well, can you depend on that? Is it, dispatchable? And I know some people want to quibble with whether nuclear is dispatchable or base load, and I think that those are kind of like not super important distinctions for the general public, right? So basically, what I'm saying is, can you turn this power plant on? Can you flip a switch or, start a process? Can you control the power coming out of this power plant? Is if the answer is yes, then okay, is it the next step? Is it carbon free? If you want to look at subsidizing some of those plants, like carbon capture, and is another example of that. Like it produces electricity first, and then you've devised a mechanism to reduce its impact from a greenhouse gas emission standpoint. That to me makes a lot more sense than mass subsidizing something that may or may not work depending on the weather and then hoping that battery storage comes along later in some capacity in order to make all these subsidized resources more valuable in terms of grid reliability. So I would say if you held a gun to my head and said subsidize something, it would
Uh-huh.
be nuclear and carbon capture because I just think that those are more valuable assets to the grid in terms of firm, reliable power.
What about geothermal? Do you think it's promising enough that you would actually put some of your subsidies there if you were choosing?
I'm just gonna say I don't know enough about the advanced geothermal to really make a call at this point. I think it's a cool emerging technology. Hopefully someday it doesn't need a subsidy, right? That's always the goal. But if you had some R&D dollars that you wanted to throw behind that, I think if my choice was spend the money on geothermal R&D or spend it subsidizing wind and solar, I would choose the geothermal. So it's just what's the best use of taxpayer resources at that point?
All right, so you are blessed with you get to decide what we're going to have, and we can build out everything instantly. You found the lamp, you rubbed it, the genie came out, or
Yeah,
whatever. What power sources, and you can say hydro, where it works and stuff. There's just limits
sure.
to that one. So outside of that, what would you use for base load, and what would you use for peak load?
Whale oil. No, uh yeah, that I thought that would be funny. So, nuclear for your base load, like what does it cost, right? If it's all like the same cost, then yeah, sure, why not nuclear for your base load? And then if you want to play around with batteries for meeting your peak load with, you have like enough gas on the system in order to make sure you can always meet your peak demand. But if you want to play around with batteries to make it carbon free and it doesn't cost you anything, then that's kind of how I would go about doing it. But that's not the world we live in. So for me, if I didn't have a genie, I'd say we have all these depreciated assets in terms of coal and natural gas and nuclear power plants. Let's keep the existing plants online as long as we can because they're going to be the lowest cost, most reliable sources of electricity. And then what makes sense moving forward in order to fill in the gaps that are left when those assets retire, and how do we most affordably meet our growing demand if the demand for data centers and AI actually materializes. So that's probably going to be natural gas combined cycle because we don't let people build ultra supercritical coal plants in the United States. It's just there's good technology out there. It's just there's not a political will to utilize that. And then let's see what happens with large nuclear reactors. I think the APR 1400 that the Koreans build is an interesting build. I think the Westinghouse 1000 AP 1000 is going to get another look, even though Georgia was not exactly a shining example of what we want the nuclear industry to look like moving forward. I think people are willing to say, okay, yeah, it's working in other countries, and this is worth investing in. This is a technology that's worth exploring. So you got my pie in the sky answer, and you kind of got my more practical answer there, David.
Yeah, and for what it's worth on Georgia, it's the most expensive one was going to be the first one they built. And the second most expensive one was going to be the second, and they went so slow.
Yeah.
If they turned around and said, we're going to do exactly the same thing and we're going to do 10 of them, that 10th one is going to be a lot less money.
Yeah, hopefully that's the dream, right?
Yeah. All right, final question. What's your biggest worry about the grid?
Oh man. I worry that we're gonna let too much dumb stuff transpire before we get our act together. So we're gonna let too many coal plants shut down before we realize how valuable they are. And then once the big storm comes, because it's gonna happen during either a really hot day or a really cold day, we're gonna have, we're gonna have failures with the gas distribution system. We've talked about that. We don't have the same kind of fuel storage value at natural gas plants that we have for nuclear plants, which can store 18 months of fuel on site, or coal plants that have generally 2 to 3 months of coal on site, but they're getting new trains all the time. So you've basically got an endless supply of fuel that's there in case you need it. So yeah, my worry is kind of like Europe. They got really complacent with their energy policy. Like they thought, okay, well, we can just have this Russian gas, and then it got cut off. And if the conditions are favorable and we have like warm winters and we don't have a severe winter storm, these plants shut down. And then we come back later and we have like another winter storm Uri, but it covers more of the country, then we're going to have worse consequences because we didn't have to reckon with them sooner. So that's my biggest worry is the complacency that a lot of people have in Congress and its state legislatures about the, dwindling reliability margins that we have.
So, what happened to Texas? What was it, last winter? Where,
2021, it was a long
yeah,
time ago now.
okay. And their biggest problem, correct me if I'm wrong, was that essentially the natural gas distribution valves froze up and stuff, so it couldn't get distributed. But be whatever may the major problem is, something like that sweeping through the Northeast, that could potentially take down an awful lot of the Eastern grid, couldn't it?
Yeah, potentially, right? So Texas has a lot of things going on. They have a lot more electric heating down there than they do in the Northeast. The Northeast has a lot of natural gas. They also have a lot of fuel oil out there. When Uri hit, the demand spiked at the same time as, the sun was down, so the solar wasn't working. The wind turbines did not perform well. There was some freezing at the beginning of it, but later, the wind turbines were operating at about 2% of their installed capacity during the height of the blackouts. And then you also had situations with the gas distribution system where the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, so the regional grid operator, ERCOT, they were shutting down electricity to natural gas compressor stations that were pumping the gas from the field, the storage, to the power plants because they didn't realize that that's where they were shedding load. So it was that disorganized. So yeah, there was some freezing, and There was an issue with one of the nuclear units in Texas as well due to cold weather issues. But the cold weather issues are solvable, right? We have nuclear plants, coal plants, and natural gas plants that operate in Minnesota where I live, and it's not the end of the world if it gets to -14. It's just another day in January. So ultimately, it's figuring out, okay, how much is it going to cost to weatherize the equipment in Texas? And is it worth spending that? That's going to be a political question. That's an economic question. But you can do that. You can winterize dispatchable power plants, but you can't make the wind blow. You can't turn the wind turbines up. So ultimately, that's why I think it makes more sense if you're going to support anything with taxpayer dollars that it's dispatchable and you can, use it when you need it, rather than hoping that it's available, uh, if and when, you have a terrible like winter storm like Uri.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. All right, everybody, it's energybadboys.substack.com. Not a hard name to remember. Thank you all.